Hello and welcome back to Workshop Wednesdays. My name's Steve, I'm the Equipment Workshop Manager. Today we are here at the amazing Essex Fire Museum to talk about all those that paid the ultimate sacrifice during the World War II. So without further ado, let's cut in and see Mike.
Fire service in the Second World War starts off actually just before hostilities in 1938 when the government formed the Auxiliary Fire Service. This was going to be a national reserve of firefighters that would support the regular fire brigades in time of war. And the government set off in 1938 to form the Auxiliary Fire Service, issuing a large number of these trailer pumps to the newly formed service on which to train. And these vehicles were supplied to the auxiliaries, who were attached to the regular fire brigades, who were generally at this time town and large village brigades, and the auxiliaries were attached to them for training purposes. It was a national auxiliary service,
right, okay,
but attached to local fire brigades for administrative and training purposes.
So were they all volunteers, or
originally the auxiliaries were all volunteers?
Right,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And just to talk about the actual trailer, so this is basically a water pump with suction hoses, and hoses deliver water as such with it.
That's correct. And the other thing to note about it is that the trailer pumps were supplied, but the fire brigades had to find vehicles to tow them.
I was just going to say, yeah, what actually towed them along?
A motley collection of requisitioned and commandeered and second-hand cars and light commercial vehicles. The best vehicle that was found to tow these trailer pumps were large American saloon cars. Surprising number of large American cars had been imported into this country before the war. The Auxiliary Fire Service was mobilised in September 1939 when war was declared, and did virtually nothing for a year until the Blitz started in September 1940.
To this, one of these bombs here, so what's that bomb there?
That is an incendiary bomb which were dropped in large numbers. You can have a canister with several hundred of these dropped out of an enemy aircraft, and they fell in large numbers, and as you can see from the example on the wall there, display there, when they hit the ground they burned very, very intensely. So they would fall from a great height, smash through the tiles and the normal domestic housing, come to rest in the attic, and immediately burst into flames and start fires. And these were dropped on towns and cities together with the high explosive bombs on a large scale from September onwards. And one of the first instances of that sort of type of bombing was just down the road here at Thameshaven, where the oil storage tanks were set on fire in September 1940 and burned for some considerable time, attracting fire service reinforcements from a huge area. We know that there were firemen from Northampton and from Leicester deployed down at Thameshaven.
So it must have gone on for some time then.
Oh yes, yeah. It burned for several weeks. The fires burned down there, and then that carried on throughout the winter of 1940-1941 with large-scale attacks all over the country, and again long distance reinforcing moves being made. This museum has on record that firemen from Romford spent Christmas Day 1940 in Manchester, putting out fires in Manchester. And such move by firemen and equipment for several hundred miles was not unknown during that period.
I suppose there wasn't actually that many fire crew available, was there?
There were quite large numbers of fire crew, particularly with the Auxiliary Fire Service. The policy seems very quickly to have been developed that when you were told to send reinforcements to a Blitz city, you sent your auxiliaries. And the result of that was a lot of auxiliaries got far more experience in firefighting than some regular firefighters had in a lifetime.
Brilliant. What Was there any major attacks like the V2 bombs? I know something happened towards Chelmsford area, was it?
There were a lot of attacks on Essex. As I said, there was the attack on Thameshaven early on in the war, and Chelmsford throughout the war was actually bombed quite considerably, and that culminated with an attack by a V2 rocket which fell on the Hoffman's Bowl bearing works in Chelmsford just before Christmas 1944. And this exhibit here shows a fire engine of that period, which were now in the livery of the National Fire Service. The code on the side indicates that it would have come from a station in Chelmsford. The firemen with it are in the uniform of the period, and this was the sort of vehicle that would have attended that particular incident. The V2 fell, caused a very large explosion, a serious fire, and quite a serious loss of life in Chelmsford at that time.
So is this the ATV?
This is, yes, an Austin ATV. It was a vehicle produced in large numbers for the National Fire Service to pull the trailer pumps.
Yeah, and these were used and sort of modified. Were they ambulances as well? They used as?
They were made. The chassis, the Austin chassis, was used for quite a variety of vehicles, but these ATVs were made specifically for the fire service. They were made with a short shelf life. It'll just see us through the war, and they carried on in Essex and elsewhere well after the war, right on into the 1950s and 60s.
Right, okay, so let's go around the front. Let's have a look at what we've got there. Okay, Mike, so talk us through what we have here. So this stirrup pump.
This is a stirrup pump, famous piece of firefighting equipment of the period. Not so much used by fire brigades as by ordinary people. You know, bucket of water, stirrup pump, short length of hose, and those little incendiary bombs we saw later. If you could get to those in their very early stages of ignition, you could put them and the fires that they would cause out in very early stages with a minimal amount of water and a bit of hand pressure on the stirrup pump.
Yeah, so for people that don't know, we still use a version of the stirrup pumps today on our Flightline appliances, and they haven't really changed that much. They're very, very subtly changed in what is possibly 100 years. So next up we've got the helmet. So we've got an AFS helmet here, and then an example of what we use in modern day firefighting. So it's very, very different. So this it's very similar to what the sort of army would use.
Yes,
Is it the same type of helmet?
Yes, it is, yeah.
That makes sense, because I mean the costs, I suppose, that are involved. And then what else have we got?
We've got the service gas mask, which was issued to all firefighters early on in the war.
Okay.
You see pictures of firemen in the height of the Blitz. They've always got the service gas mask worn on their chest in the alert position. Never ever used in anger, because gas attacks never materialise, but that is the service respirator. And then a helmet with the same style as the AFS helmet, but with the National Fire Service badge on the front, and a length of canvas hose, which was the type of hose in extensive use at that time. So
you mentioned, you said firemen there, and unlike today, obviously they've got men and women, example, that work in the fire service today. Back then it wasn't so accepting, I suppose, was it? No, the description firemen is accurate for the period. There were no operational female firefighters. Women had been recruited into the auxiliary fire service and transferred on to the National Fire Service in 1941, but their roles essentially were first and foremost, and very importantly, communications. And communications actually included being dispatch riders on motorcycles when the telephone network broke down, as it quite frequently did in heavy air raids, and admin and catering. There are examples of women seizing fire hoses and joining in with their male colleagues. Brilliant. But these were heat of the moment actions, but there were awards for bravery to women in those circumstances. And another job that they undertook
quite extensively, were driving senior officers round during the bombing in staff cars and delivering petrol to keep fire pumps going, because fire engines were working for days on end at the height of the Blitz.
Well, thankfully a lot more inclusive environment these days. So what's the special guest we've got here?
The special chap we've got there, if you look at him closely, he's wearing the fire uniform of the period, but the important differences are, first of all, his personal equipment, which many of those watching will recognise as being essentially military. His headgear, which is a beret, military-style beret in lieu of the peak cap, and boots and gaiters, and a lot of badges on his arm. We didn't go in for badges on the arm in the fire service during the war, except for this particular part of the fire service, which is he's a fireman of the overseas column.
What did they do?
The overseas columns were formed in 1944. The military planners had foreseen that once the D-Day landings were successful and Allied troops started advancing across Europe, their lines of communication and their supply dumps would be very vulnerable to fire,
I suppose,
accidental sabotage or enemy action, and that this was likely to be beyond the scale of fire services that were provided by certainly the British Army itself. It's had its own firefighting organisation. So it was resolved to send 12 columns, self-supporting columns, each of about 500 firemen with their equipment, which included mobile kitchens, mobile workshops, to support the Allied armies on the continent.
So the fire service was quite an integral part of the sort of landings as well as such?
It was, yes. In fact, in the lead up to the invasion of Normandy, the fire service in this country had mounted a huge operation to move firefighters from the north of England to the south of England to cover the preparations for D-Day. But this was to be a totally new operation on the continent itself, where you would have civilian firemen working very close to the actual front line under military direction, under military command. In the event, the difficulties of putting civilians in that position proved to be more problematic than I think people had envisaged. Only one column went. It sailed from Tilbury in January 1945, sailed to Ostend in Belgium, and was deployed initially with the American Army. And the Americans were extremely impressed with the can-do attitude of the National Fire Service column that worked with them. They worked with the Americans for about 2 or 3 months on the continent. At one stage, the column was actually operating in 4 different countries: France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Germany.
That's really fascinating. I had no idea that we even had an overseas.
They were. The Americans, as I say, were very impressed with them. That was evidenced in a letter of appreciation from a senior American general to the British authorities at the end of their attachment, and to the award of an American medal to the commander of the column. They were then pulled back into Belgium, and they supported the British Army's supply lines in Belgium, and came back to Tilbury in June 1945. So they were actually on the continent in Belgium on VE Day.
Oh, right, brilliant. So one of the main reasons we remember VE Day is for the people that paid the ultimate sacrifice, so we can have what we have today, basically. And we have a display here of firefighters that have done so. Mike, can you tell me about this?
This is a display recording the contribution of firefighters, particularly from Essex and in Essex during the Second World War. It includes a list of firefighters that lost their lives on operations in Essex during the war, and quite a lengthy list of awards for bravery to firemen and members of the fire service in Essex during that period. Of particular note there is a number of awards for bravery to the old Thurrock Fire Brigade, which covered Thames Haven. But the display itself incorporates quite a potted history of the fire service locally during the war, the overseas columns, the reinforcements that came into Essex, the reinforcements that were sent out of Essex.
Yeah.
It's a comprehensive acknowledgement of the debt we owe to firefighters during that period.
Definitely, yeah, 100%. Well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate your time, and we'll catch you next time.